When we talk about India's software boom today, we imagine startups, code, campuses, and global clients. But rewind to the 1950s and 60s, and here's the twist: there was no Indian software industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Info Rush, where curiosity meets clarity. I am Disha,
I am Rudrakshi.
and this is episode 4 Trendsetters. And today we are talking about the unlikely birth of Indian software and the people who set the trend. In the early decades, software wasn't a product, it was a free add on. Multinational hardware giants like IBM from the US and ISIL from the UK sold computers to Indian firms, and software came bundled with the machine. Operating systems, basic programs, mostly written in Fortran and COBOL. Fortran was used mainly for scientific and engineering calculations, while COBOL was designed for business tasks like payroll, inventory, and accounting. In short, Fortran helped scientists crunch numbers, and COBOL helped companies run their books.
While you talk about hardware, software, I was just trying to visualize the computers back then. We have, in fact, talked about this in our very first episode about how massive these machines were, right?
Yes, and these were called mainframes. Think of a modern kitchen. The mainframe was like having a refrigerator, a dishwasher, a stove, and a tall pantry, all wired together to work as one machine. Today, we each have our own computer. Back then, an entire company, thousands of employees shared one frame. The mainframe stayed in a secure room, and the employees sat at what can be called as dumb terminals, just a screen and keyboard with no processing power of their own, that were wired to the mainframe. When you typed a command, the mainframe in the other room did the actual work and sent the result back to your screen.
Which would take hours and even days, sometimes, if I'm not wrong.
Exactly. Now, coming back to the 1960s, as globally things began to shift when IBM unbundled software from hardware. By the 1970s, the situation hadn't changed much. Multinationals still dominated hardware. Software was still bundled. So, how did India end up exporting software? Ironically, the answer wasn't innovation, it was foreign exchange pressure. To export software, Indian firms had to design it for globally standard hardware, which in the 1970s meant IBM mainframes. But there was a problem. Import duties on this hardware were nearly 300%. So IBM sold India what the companies here could afford: old, refurbished, and often outdated machines. Eventually, the government lowered import duties, but with a condition. Software exporters had to earn back twice the foreign exchange spent on hardware imports within 5 years. The rules were tough, the ecosystem was fragile. But this was the moment the Indian software industry quietly began. And leading the charge was a company that would later define Indian IT: Tata Consultancy Services. Founded in 1968, TCS became India's first software exporting company. After a few domestic projects, it landed its first major export assignment in 1973, developing an inventory control system for an electricity generation unit in Iran. Around the same time, TCS worked with Burroughs Corporation, then the world's second largest hardware company, to develop a hospital information system in the UK. This wasn't just a project, it was a template, a proof that Indian engineers could deliver complex software for global clients. remotely, reliably, and at scale. By the early 1980s, despite restrictive policies, India stood out with significant software exports. Around 30 Indian companies had already begun exporting software following suit, and India's edge was clear. Cost and English. Lower wages made India cost competitive, and English made it globally accessible.
As global trends move towards the unbundling of software from hardware, Indian firms faced the high cost of importing standard IBM hardware. This forced early pioneers, most notably the Tata Consultancy Services (TCS), to look towards international markets. This period established the Indian IT template, a model based on high skilled labor, cost competitiveness, and export oriented growth.
However, this wasn't a boom yet, it was the warm up. The trendsetters had arrived, and the world was about to take notice. That's today's info rush. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and log out smarter.